Welcome back to my channel, Star Booze.
A used dog tag, a live studio, and when a legendary figure in Hollywood made daytime, the television goes quiet. Music wasn't the beginning, or cheers. It began with an initial. Silence is much heavier, not the type that consolation, the cautionary sort. The type of quiet that descends upon a studio, similar to the instant before a blow is delivered, coiled, electric, and thick. The stage of view was illuminated by a gleam of studio lights. However, the light didn't reach the eyeballs of the man on the center left seat. Sylvester Stallone sat motionless, wearing a faint dog tag, visible beneath his collar-worn black jacket. He appeared older, rougher than the posters and interviews, but more authentic in some way. His fists were resting on his thighs as if they had been engraved there. On the other side of him, Whoopi Goldberg smiled and leaned back. Her own nerves couldn't handle it. "So, Sly," she added in a syrupy voice, "and steel. You still have that on you, a tiny metal object around your neck?" Rambo hung it up decades ago, I thought. There was a ripple of laughter. Not loud, just enough to see how it goes. The type of waiting to see whether it's acceptable while laughing. Make a louder chuckle. Stallone was not amused. He did not recoil. He just gazed at slowly and steadily, then extended her hand and pulling the dog tag gently from underneath his collar, allowing it to shine. "That small piece of metal was the property of my brother," he added in a gruff, low voice. "He passed away in a location that most people can't even utter. He donned this when his final words were prayed. The space didn't simply go silent. It fell into not a word." Whoopi blinked. Her co-hosts, they moved in their chairs. A single camera for a little moment, the operator broke the frame. Even the lights in the studio now felt excessively bright. Stallone left the room empty. He allowed breathe for a moment. A person in the front row audibly swallowed. An employee backstage whispered. Cut to the advertisement. However, the director raised a hand. Not yet. Not right now. The anxiety was palpable. Tighten. Not with hostility, but with presence. He softly rolled the tag in between his fingertips. "This is not something I wear. For sentimentality," he added, "I don it, since certain things aren't meant to be forgotten, despite the pain." Nobody shifted. A cough sounded in the distance. Back. Then, as though recalling the structure during the program, Whoopi laughed abrasively and abruptly. "Well, that quickly got heavy." Levity was forced into the air as she spoke. However, the energy in it prevented it from lifting. The room had changed irrevocably. Charm didn't come to Stallone. He didn't come on over and spar. He arrived with something more substantial than an opinion. The truth. Additionally, it had struck like a kick to the gut. Initial round. It was 2 days prior. The electronic mail too, silently, it had landed. Subject line. Mr. Stallone is invited by the View to a discussion about American heritage and principles. There was nothing that yelled, ambush. However, Tony, his lifelong squinting at the screen like a publicist, the label was a warning. "They're not. I'd like to speak with you," he whispered. Stallone said, "They're luring a bear." Leaning on his modest home's window, arms folded, downtown office, a faded, behind him is a Rocky II poster. He said nothing, only saw the cities change. Under the light of the late afternoon. "Tony, they want the old Stallone," he added. "The has-been. The punchline. They believe, if the appropriate bruise is prodded, you'll swing, they'll get viral." Moment. With a half-smile, Sly turned slowly, developing as if pulling were painful. Then perhaps, I show him something that they hadn't anticipated. Continue. He grabbed an old canvas duffel bag on the ground. From within, he extracted a little scuffed case. He took it off the zipper, exposing 2 damaged antique boxing gloves leather, frayed knuckles, and discolored with time. "These," he said while clutching one. "The gloves I wore that week were delicate." Frankie passed away. Tony froze. Individuals. "Believe that my suffering makes me brittle," Stallone stated. "It forces me to be truthful." He slid one, returned the glove to its case but left the other out. He held it in his hand like a relic. "I will not enter the studio to fight," he said. "However, I'm not walking in unarmed as well." Tony took a seat, shoulders down. "If you intend to do this as you see fit." Stallone gave a nod. Once, without rebellion, with composure, settled gravity. The type that was fashioned over decades of undervaluation. By in the morning, rumors were beginning to circulate. On the internet. "Stallone is performing The View. Why? He's too traditional. Is this harm? In charge of something? He doesn't matter. He will be devoured by them." He perused, not a bit. Rather, he sat quietly. Behind the black vehicle that took, he went to the studio. He had one glove in his luggage, tucked inside his collar is a dog tag. He gazed at a metropolis, outside the window that once gave him encouragement, then forgot about him. Then, like a recollection, he muttered his name once more. He didn't prepare sound or practice. Bites. He had no intention of winning. He was coming to speak the truth, and the reality doesn't yell all the time. Occasionally, it just appears breathless, bruised, and unalterable. In the studio again, the red light blinked in real time. The stage appeared similar to any other talk show set glossy, overly upbeat, the type of location designed to mitigate harsh realities. The co-host grinned broadly, teeth clenched, rhythm, practiced teasing, and limits. Stallone sat motionless, his stance similar like stone, dog tag, and barely capturing the light beneath his collar. He didn't look at the cameras. He had no intention of performing. Whoopi leaned closer, grinning. Someone with more experience in this than the majority of people had lived. "So, Sylvester," she said in a lighthearted tone, but poised. "You've portrayed soldiers, gangsters, boxers, and even a man who engaged in combat wearing a headband in the forest and not shirt." The audience chuckled, prompted and well-timed. "However, let me know when." "Did you choose to pursue a career in priesthood?" Dog tag, this time with a bigger, chuckle-planned reactive. Stallone remained still. He allowed. The initial response was quiet. Next, slowly and deep gravel, he said. "Some individuals donatives to attract notice." I put my on to recall. Some of the audience fell silent. Now the beat was off. The strain was no longer lighthearted. Whoopi brought up an eyebrow. "You're claiming that the person who blew bowing and arrowing up tanks is suddenly, I'm here to discuss memories." She leaning back, he was pleased with the blow. The room echoed with another laugh. Stallone moved a little, but not grounded and defensive. "I've played a lot, many personalities, but suffering that never required a screenplay." The giggling stopped. He went on, his eyes level, his voice steady. "The movie lines are all familiar to you. It's not regarding the force of your blows." A few in the audience laughed and began to mouth along. "It concerns how difficult you can get strike and continue on." He waited for the echo to subside. "That wasn't he said, I'm in line for a trailer." That was I composed this while my life was breaking in the background. As soon as my brother passed away. When everything became silent and there was no applause. Whoopi's. The edges of the smile were tight. "I'm not. He said that he was come to be a priest. I'm present because suffering occasionally need a voice. That doesn't shiver." No one in the crowd laughed. They failed to clap. They paid attention. From the A young man lowered his phone in the back row, a woman placed her hand in the second row, slowly to her mouth. The atmosphere had altered. Now the lighting was too hot. The stage as well synthetic. Whoopi cleared her throat. Well, that went by rather quickly. Stallone once nodded. Pain doesn't hold off till the ideal moment. Suddenly, the first actual round was over. Not in conjunction with cheers, with a knockout, but not with a quiet that indicated he wasn't present toolbox. His purpose was to reveal the ring. For nobody spoke for a time. Not Theco hosts rather than viewers. Not even Whoopi. Suddenly, her note cards felt too thin in her palms, like though the paper she was holding didn't fit the narrative anymore. Unfolding. Leaning forward, Stallone elbows on knees. The stage. A little, deep lines are traced by lighting in his face. History, not age. I'd want to show you anything, he uttered. He spoke in a soothing tone, anchored, as if a guy were reaching inside he rarely drew on that memory. He raised a tiny object next to his chair, the type of weathered canvas bag that you don't purchase, the type you maintain. The audience leaning automatically. The camera operator even altered, slightly enlarging. He opened the bag and took out a pair of vintage ancient boxing gloves made of cracked leather. They appeared to have experienced hell. The knuckles and the laces were frayed, smoothed out by use. The time had painted scars on them. These, he said, cradling one in his hand, are not in a filming location. He stopped, allowing the weight to hang of the moment. I donned these the Frankie. Passed away that week. You sensed not a gasp, a room inhale. Not quite yet, but that individual's acute intake when they feel a sense of holiness. My sibling was stationed abroad, according to Stallone, his voice a bit lower, nearly shattering, yet not shuddering. He had faith in service in anything in sacrifice greater than ego. One of his jaw muscles flexed. I didn't answer the phone when it came. Weep. I refrained from screaming. I didn't even talk. He lifted them and said, I put these on. I went to the gym, got the gloves, and struck the sack until my hands started to bleed. Them. He gazed at the gloves as though they could still recall, not to be overlooked, but to preserve his life. Each strike was a prayer that I was unsure of how to say. Then it took place. A dim flicker, a beep. The screen behind them intended for sponsor and generic graphics. Suddenly, a message appeared on the ad screens. Backstage, the producer had unintentionally, the incorrect dissection overlay was triggered, but it was too late to prevent it in a big way. Text in white on a black backdrop. The words blazed across the atmosphere. I serve in the Marines. Afghanistan is where I lost my best friend. I was about to call it quits tonight, but watch Stallone discuss suffering as, it's not a sign of weakness. Perhaps I should wait. One more day. The whole room took a breath at once. A single gulp. Heartbeats in the hundreds. One pause that made time drag. Stallone turned gently in the direction of the screen. He didn't flinch. He took no action. He thought you couldn't see it in his eyes, however, in the quiet that descended into his position like weight, as if goal. The other hosts were taken aback. Looking up at the screen, Whoopi's mouth opened a little. The snark wore off from her entirely. That's when she began. Ceased. Her speech was frequently harsh and, now, smooth sounded like a real person. Stallone stood. He kept his eyes off the camera. I investigated it. Additionally, you felt like though he could see through it, as if his words were no longer for the studio. However, for that individual who lives someplace in a silent room, holding on to the side of a choice. Should you be viewing this, Stallone spoke, in a steady but forceful tone. I have no idea what your name is. I'm not sure. What you've experienced. He looked at the table's gloves, although I'm aware of, it's as though the suffering is the owner of the space." The audience fell silent. The camera crew had ceased their activities as well. "It's not necessary for you to trust in me," he stated. "However, have faith in the fact that you're still breathing doesn't. Nothing." He moved ahead as though that would bridge the impossibly long gap. "Don't simply leave this world." "But," he added, "not until you strike back, a minimum of once." Once more, silence, but this, it wasn't heavy at the moment, it was holy. Whoopi gave a sharp blink. She was found by her hand. She didn't lift the glass of water, she simply held it in place like a rock. She wasn't certain she was worthy. Within the command, nobody shifted to cut the feed. It no longer felt like television. It felt like a battlefield or even a church, or perhaps both. Slowly, the screen dimmed. Just silence, no cheers, no music picture. Of a man who didn't show up to perform, with a message that wasn't intended to be broadcast, but was more important than anyone. Understood. And in some way, without preparation, the view was no longer a spectacle. Could turn into something that could perhaps save a life. Blackness crept across the screen. There were no more words, but the quiet stayed, holy, electrifying and thick. Sylvester Stallone did not take a seat again. He simply stood with one hand resting on, using the other brushing. Softly on the gloves, the dog tag remained on his chest, because his sibling was lost in the war. Nobody applauded, and in some way, that summed everything up. Next, one by one, they got up. No stage cue, no music, no nothing but humans standing. Camera signal. First, a woman with arms close to the front held close to her chest as though she containing a delicate object. Next, a man. The same person in the third row who had his arms folded at the start of the show, unfolding them now and getting up without a noise. The ripple follows. One row at a time, silent, uncoordinated, and strong. Not one, someone gave a clap. Not because they weren't shifted, but only because they were. Additionally, they knew it would be ruined by clapping. Stallone remained motionless, looking at them. Not to receive praise, but to acknowledge the gravity of the situation. Individuals weren't answering his questions. They were reacting to something that they had not observed on television during the day for a long period. The truth without a plan, suffering without strength, without volume, performance. Whoopi was still standing. She remained, now sitting with her back slightly bent, her in her hand, the note cards were limp. Her eyes was secured on Stallone. Nevertheless, there was no prolonged defiance in the background. There was something different. Thought, remorse, acknowledgement. At last, she seldom spoke. Audible. "You came here to lose, not to win." "Did you do anything?" Slowly, Stallone shook his head. "No," he stated. "I came because I thought there could be, who needed to know they weren't watching, insane for continuing to feel." Another moment. Then, mindlessly, Whoopi stood as well, not to take back authority, but in order to demonstrate solidarity, but because she couldn't remain sat for a while like this. The room was silent, yet it wasn't awkward. It was reverent, holy, and the such as, those heard at funerals or awakenings. Stallone took a slow exhale and went back to his chair. Not since the occasion had passed, but because it had calmed down. The gloves remained there. However, they were now more than signs of suffering. They served as evidence that ignoring certain wounds won't make them go away. Being visible helps them recover. Additionally, for the view had, for the first time, in years, nothing to argue about, nothing to sell, nothing to spin. It simply had an entire room, of individuals supporting a man who taught them how to feel without feeling guilty. No one was there, yet the lights remained on. No longer observed them, not the viewers. Nobody stood, not even Whoopi or the crew, as though rising from a long sleep at her Mark dream that she was unaware she was in. Stallone maintained his posture while sitting, calm but rooted. The gloves were seated silent statues between them two, all of the things that had just unfolded. The producers backstage frantically murmured, attempting to make a decision whether or not to attend the commercial, but nobody dared to alter the feed. Due to uncommon had occurred, and all of the room was aware of it. Not a moment of virality, a human. Stallone looked around, in Whoopi's direction. Not with triumph, but with a much heavier object. Mercy, she lowered her gaze to her chords. We're become worthless, similar to scripts following a revolution. I didn't intend to make fun of you. At last, she said. Her tone wasn't just, to be honest, it was softer. Occasionally, we are so skilled at speaking that we forget how to pay attention. Stallone gave a nod. Everyone does. A pause. Nobody filled it in a hurry. Then his voice did not rise as he leaned forward, but going deeper. You are aware that he understood, he said. It's not that. People fear pain, he said, picking up once more, rolled the dog tag between his fingers that resemble beads of prayer. They're fearing that I'm the only one experiencing it. A rhythm. I had my brother's tag on me. He went on for years, believing it strengthened me. It wasn't the metal, though. That made me stronger. He extended his hand, and only one glove was raised. It was, keeping in mind that the battle didn't just because I became weary. He set the glove down, into the hands of Whoopi. She gazed at it, uncertain, as though he had just handed a past she wasn't prepared to face. It's not necessary for you to believe what it trusts, he replied softly. Just don't chuckle at what some of us survived from off camera. A staff member was blotting away tears. One more in the muttered the lighting rig. That's the most authentic thing I've ever witnessed. Then Stallone stood slowly. He examined the audience, remaining silent and standing, and made a tiny nod that seemed like an ancient sign of reverence, not performance. He looked at Whoopi last time. I came here not to be. It makes sense, he remarked. I came to remind. It's acceptable to feel this way, people, even when the world tells you not to. He remained motionless. Hand. He made no gesture. He simply strolled, through the camera and the silence lights, across the area that once be merely a studio. Now, another thing completely. And when he got to the brink, he stopped in front of the stage. Then, without, he turned around and spoke loudly enough to be heard in the room. Occasionally, you do not have to win the game. You simply must remain upright. The screen dimmed. No applause, no outro music. Just one picture showing the gloves laying on the table with an echoing captional over the internet before dark. Strength persists. It doesn't make noise. If you like this tale, please let us know in their marks. Additionally, remember to like for more motivational content, share, and subscribe. Tales.